introduction needed. He is an attorney as well, and he's been working in Washington. He was a delegate, and then he was a congressman from Baltimore County, the 2nd Congressional District. Would you like to start?
Hey, Dee. Hi, everyone. It's good to be back. It's Baltimore County, my real home. We're seeing lots of familiar faces today. I do have a special guest here at the beginning. I know due to popular demand, this person behind me here.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Baltimore.
Hi, Kendall.
We miss you.
Baltimore County girl.
We hope everybody's safe. We're all good on this end. Special note that I'm working for the president, loving every bit of it. I'm the director of a SMART program with the Sexual Offender Monitoring Program. So I'm anxious to get back to work, as I'm sure many of you are.
I'm just going to offer a couple brief observations. One is, isn't it interesting how instinctual the response has been between the respective parties? Very predictable. And it really explains the difference between Republicans and Democrats today. And obviously, I'm talking about the pandemic and sort of the each party's instinct as to where to go, how to react, what steps to take. On the Republican side, you've seen the president, and not just the Republican governors particularly, out there, look, we have to do this. It's a high price to pay. We're suspending our civil liberties, but we can't wait to get back to normal. We can't wait to get back to markets and capitalism and freedom and individual rights and everything that we stand for. Where on the other side, obviously, Democrats trust government more. It's more government always. That's their instinct. Longer stay-at-homes and all that sort of thing. So you see it really played out. The philosophical underpinnings of the parties are playing out in very tangible ways here. And you really see it not only through the president, but through the governors as well. And so we'll see how that ultimately plays out as we enter now, as those states enter so-called phase 1 of the recovery plan. With regard to Bernie Sanders and the Democratic Party, obviously they've lost Bernie now, so the progressives really do not have a leader, so to speak, with Elizabeth Warren out as well. Nevertheless, both I think liberals and progressives see this pandemic as an opportunity to accomplish what Homer, and Stormy, and Cohen, and Schiff, and everything else hasn't been able to do, which is hurt this president and potentially, obviously, they tried to remove him, but in this case, make sure he doesn't get reelected. So what you see out of the mouths of some folks on the left these days is an opportunity. Take advantage of the opportunity to, one, show the president is weak, unprepared, not a serious person. He's cost lives, he's cost jobs, and all that. You're going to hear that narrative coming from the Democrats throughout the rest of the campaign. And our narrative, quite frankly, should be obviously just the converse, reminding everybody how good everything was prior to this shutdown. Historic numbers with regard to unemployment, how low it was, the markets and consumer confidence and just wealth creation in our country. We also should remind everyone how prepared the administration was. In fact, the president took a lot of hits, obviously, with regard to his early travel ban. He was called a xenophobe and all that, nativist and all that sort of stuff. Everything that you trot out to charge this president with. But I think we probably should make the case, it's factual. Through his early action, not inaction, the president ended up saving lives. I also want to make a point about the transparency that goes with this president. Now, this president is painful, we all know. Many Republicans, most Republicans love him. Some Republicans have come to like him. Some Republicans are still a little wary of him, but understand how successful he's been. But the one thing you have to understand about this president is that he's an optimist and he's a businessman. He's a salesman, and he loves selling, if you will, America and freedom, going around the world and making the case for America. As you've seen in these, not just early press conferences, but these daily press conferences, he's also been about optimism with regard to this pandemic. We're going to get through it. we have to pay a price in the short term, but we're going to come back, and we're going to come back stronger. Employment's going to come back. The economy is going to come back. The market's going to come back. So you see this president as, in my view, the most transparent political leader of this generation, certainly going back many decades in American politics. And I find that refreshing. Sometimes he gets in trouble. Sometimes he gets ahead of himself in answering questions. But to have a president come out on a daily basis and answer questions straight up from an often hostile media is very unusual. And I think it's very refreshing for a lot of Americans who fly over America, quite frankly.
Governor Ehrlich,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you for coming. We have monthly meetings, and the Republican women are growing in Baltimore by leaps and bounds. So I know the virus has put a lot of people out, and appreciate you keeping this commitment.
Well,
I'm going to start with a question that's near and dear to, I think, all of our hearts, and that's our children. You mentioned that you have a son in college and a 16-year-old, and so many parents are literally frightened about the indoctrination that we see with these children in college.
Yeah.
Sometimes their grades are affected,
Yes.
sometimes they're ostracized, and they're silenced. I was reading a lot about you, and I read a little statement I thought was so interesting. You said back at Berkeley, the traditional liberalism, they wanted freedom of speech. But the progressive liberals at school, they actually want to stop freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And that includes all of our children. What would you advise parents to do?
Traditional liberalism that we associate with Hubert Humphreys of the world and the Walter Mondale of the world, that is out of favor in the Democratic Party. That brand of liberalism, referring to my observation, but others have made this observation as well, was all about free speech. By the way, it was all about strong America as well. It was about dissent. I make the point in many of my writings that America is about dissent. Great revolution in the 60s, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, were all about dissent. It was about speech and how highly protected speech is in a free society and how we value it. It's one of the reasons our country was born. And yet now, as the Democratic Party proceeds left and liberals are left behind, and progressives are in power. And progressives are not about speech at all, as you point out. By the way, I've written about this particular subject many times in recent years, and I would point everyone to Western Journal, one of the really highly rated conservative websites out there. I write for them regularly. I just have 2 pieces out this week, so please look at my column from Western Journal where I talk about this issue. So I think we need to understand that what we're dealing with here is not traditional liberalism, it's progressivism. And progressivism is about shutting down speech and freedom and about name-calling and sort of anti-intellectual. When you can't argue, when you don't feel like engaging, you just come up with go-vicks and icks and try to charge your opponents with hate speech and shut it down. It's anti-intellectual, it's wrong, and we should never put up with it. With regard to your question, our kids, my kids, your kids, many kids, have been raised with a set of particular values and morals and political views. When they go to these very liberal environments, these very liberal schools, as you correctly state, they're often challenged, sometimes in very inappropriate ways. So when it's inappropriate, when it costs a student a grade, your daughter or your son needs to go to the dean. They need to scream further. They need to stand up for themselves. They should not just indulge or acquiesce this indoctrination on campus. With regard to their particular views, and I made the point in an article I wrote a few weeks ago, now that they're home, it's an opportunity to remind them about the morals and the values and the political views that you instilled in them. But what I tell my kids and what I'm telling you right now is engage respectfully, but do not back down. Do not acquiesce. Do not indulge the left. Engage respectfully. If somebody wants to call you a hater and a thisophobe and thatophobe, all right, don't react emotionally to your training, to your intellect, make your factual case. They'll look bad, not you. Now, that's not easy for us to talk about here. It's not easy in a political environment. But to the extent these values and these beliefs, these moral codes are instilled in your kids, they'll survive this. They'll survive this. Some may question, but most will survive. And again, they should never back down. To the extent we back down, we become part of the problem, not part of the solution.
They read your book, America, Hope for Change, because it really gets into the excessive intrusion of government and why, and actually highlight that book for your son or daughter.
Regardless of the issue, as you said, they need to engage. And oftentimes, they'll get their juices flowing. You know, they'll get more involved in politics because they're being challenged. But because they thought about it before they get to college, because these values are so ingrained, it'll be relatively easy to engage. And once they get going, they'll become activists and they'll join the Young Republican Club and the YAF, all these conservative clubs that are now on these campuses in order to combat the left. But by the way, I should add this. I make this point a lot. Not just the professors. You can engage professors in the classroom. The real problem in these schools is progressive administrators. You never see, you never hear of them, but they have tremendous power. And we get into a different area here, which is parents becoming activists as well, making the schools know how unhappy you are with regard to, for instance, an economics department without one free market economist. Alumni have terrific power, particularly the power of the dollar, right? They come to you and say, please give our annual giving. Please write a check. Well, wait a second. I'm going to really think twice about my check because my kid goes to this school. He hasn't seen a conservative professor yet. What's the problem here? Why can't we have a conservative professor in the politics or economics department or the sociology department for that matter? So I think alums also have a role to play as well. Oh, by the way, we haven't gotten to this issue, but this is suspension of free speech on campus. These speech codes and these trigger warnings and these phony, made-up constructs that the left has come up with in order to shut speech down and demonize conservative thinkers. We need to fight this as well. And the president has been very active as well as threatening, hopefully in some cases, shutting off dollars to those schools that practice this sort of anti-First Amendment activity. It's real serious here. Speech codes, this is college. You're supposed to debate. You're supposed to dissent. You're supposed to be emotional. You're supposed to protest. It's college. To the extent we shut one side down, we got a problem in our culture, and that problem is growing.
Do you think China is one of our biggest threats?
Well, Karen, I just wrote a piece on this last week. I would direct on that very issue. I would direct everyone to Western Journal, Bob Ehrlich. By the way, again, on my Facebook and my Twitter, these articles appear as well, my regular column. China is our number one opponent these days. They have real ambitions to be a superpower. They're on the cusp of becoming the world's largest economy. They are a democratic regime, obviously. They stifle civil liberties, but they have this sort of capitalism with Chinese characteristics, what they call it. They take Marxist-Leninist principles and try to modernize them and try to incorporate at least the rhetoric of Marxism-Leninism with market economies, with market capitalism. We've actually had a lot of success in the last couple decades doing that, as we know. You've seen the GNP growth, for example. But again, they don't play by the rules. They try to control international agencies like the World Health Organization. We've seen the disastrous results here in this case with regard to their MO. So again, do we engage the Chinese? Absolutely. We must engage the Chinese. They're a superpower. They're the next coming superpower. And that I found this, Karen, so ironic when the Democrats spent their first 3 years talking about Russia, 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 Putin, 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 to many of us who worked in the Trump campaign was really a joke. And ultimately, the American public found out it was a joke as well. Everybody talks about Russia, Russia, Russia. Russia has the gross domestic product of the state of Texas. It's a corrupt regime. The old republics have no interest in revisiting Soviet-style repression. Putin has real problems, but he can be a miscreant. He can cause problems. He can conduct cyber attacks against our election, and he'll continue to do that. He can invade former republics. He can invade Ukraine. He can invade Georgia, but he can't really be a superpower. But China can and is, and we need to take that very seriously.
Deficit spending without it leading to destructive inflation.
Worried about, I think the economists these days are not so worried about inflation given the state of unemployment, given the lack of consumer demand, given the illiquidity in our economy. So right now, that may be a problem in the future, but not in the immediate future. Our problem is going to be building liquidity, obviously, up, getting small businesses back into liquidity, getting consumerism back. Don't forget, we talked about it a lot, we take it for granted, but this economy is backed up by consumerism. We buy stuff. Americans buy stuff. Whether bricks and mortar stores or through Amazon, we buy stuff. This has diminished our appetite to buy, and it certainly has. We're going to take a hit, and we're going to take that hit for a while going forward. So with regard to inflation, it's a potential problem in the future, but for now, I applaud both the congressional reaction and the Fed's reaction to, again, build up liquidity in a suddenly downtrodden.
You signed into law the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Act. And actually, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation said it was one of the most great environmental achievements in 20 years. So obviously, you have a heart for the environment. So let's talk Green New Deal. Seems like we're polarized on this issue, and some people think that it is a crusade to actually save the world, while others think that it is a radical agenda to control the world and government. Could you give us some ideas on that?
Well, I think from the left, it's both. They're not mutually exclusive. I think there are a lot of people with real, grounded concerns about the future of the Earth, about fossil fuels and ozone and global warming, and that's fine. And obviously, as conservatives, we generally see it as an issue as well. We know temperature change occurs. The issue is what to do about it. And the specific issue here is, and this gets to the second answer, is what should the private sector do about it? We would have the private sector remedy these issues, and now the United States leads the world in ozone reduction over the past year. You don't hear about that. Why? Fracking and natural gas and technology. We believe in technology. But there is certainly a school of thought on the left that uses these arguments to fight capitalism. They do not believe in market capitalism. They do not believe in market freedoms. They're real socialists. They believe in government control. And they believe in limited horizon. You know, as conservatives, as free marketeers, we believe the horizons are limited. We believe in technology in the private sector. For instance, we believe in science and medicine. We think medicine is going to cure the problem. Is going to come up with medicines with regard to this pandemic, the coronavirus, and everything else that arises in the future. We're optimists, but those on the far left obviously see a very different world. They see one of limited horizons, limited energy, limited economic development. So again, what to do about it, and obviously technology, particularly the natural gas revolution, has really helped here. And that's science, and that's technology, and that's the market, and that's what people believe in.